Ladies, bros, non-binary those, welcome back to Moonlight Kingdom Reviews. Here it's your man on the moon. We are back here reviewing episodes 4, 5, and 6 of the Vince McMahon documentary on Netflix, Mr. McMahon. Let's get into that. Boom. Okay then. Episode 4 was it? Yeah. Episode 4. Hmm. Diving into this. This episode starts in the aftermath of the Montreal screw job. Ultimately, the creation of the Mr. McMahon character, the birth of that character with that infamous promo that he cut on Bret Hart in the aftermath of the screw job saying, Bret screwed Bret. I have no sympathy for Bret. And like, there was this clip there where he's talking to some guy, and this reporter is like, they asked him like, "Are you a good guy or a bad guy?" He's like, "Nah, I'll always be the good guy." He's like, "But they're booing you now, though." It's like that's the most heel shit you could say. I'll always be the good guy. I'm just like, get the out of here, man. Clearly, that's not what's happening here. Trying to make Brett look like the bad guy when he's the one who was wronged. Like, that was weird. You're the one who set up that interview. We know you're the one running the show now. You can't just go back to being an announcer. We know you own the place. We know you're the one pulling the strings. So, yeah, that was the thing. But yeah, he talks. I mean, present day, Vince McMahon talks about how, as his character, he was inspired by this man named a man named Dr. Jerry Graham, wrestler from back in the days. I'm guessing the days of I don't know Vern Gagne and them or whatever, or not Gagne, Gorilla Monsoon. Like, yeah, someone from back in those days. He said he watched a guy named Jerry Graham, and that's what inspired his character because he was apparently in the car with the guy one time, and they were just blowing past stoplights. Like living, like dude lived however the hell he wanted to live, did however he wanted, and couldn't nobody stop him. And we had that crazy, he had like dyed blonde hair and all that. He was apparently the ultimate heel who was hated by everybody, and that's he lived a wonderful life, apparently a luxurious lifestyle, spent money on crazy things, and Superman wanted that. He wanted to be that character on screen, so that's kind of what it is. So you can kind of see inklings of the Mr. McMahon character in Ted DiBiase. That was the closest Vince could come to being the kind of character, having the kind of character he wanted to be on TV, would be to basically use another wrestler as an avatar, have him say the kind of things he would say, have him do the things he wanted to do. Like, yeah, it's kind of a bummer that we never got to see Ted DiBiase across the ring from Mr. McMahon. It would be interesting to see how the two characters would be written, almost. Yeah. The doc then shifts to the creation of the Attitude Era. And apparently, Bruce Pritchard, who'd been working for WWE for a great many years, from the days where they were the World Wrestling Federation to get their thought period, and he would later go to working TNA for a while before coming back. Yeah, he thought the Attitude Era started the one night when Vince McMahon wasn't there, and they were taping an episode of Raw, and Shawn Michaels arrived wearing bicycle shorts, and he had this sock stuffed down his front of his pants. But Shawn Michaels swears that that's not a sock; it was gauze. It was actually just a bunch of gauze that he stuck down there. And after that, after that aired on WWE TV, WWE then started to shift gears, because that really did the ratings, and DX started taking more of a prominent role. Shawn Michaels and Triple H started doing these more ludicrous stunts on television, and the show became geared less towards children and more towards teenagers and young adults. So if the previous episode's central focus was the exit of Bret Hart and the Montreal Screwjob, and before that it was the Outsiders, this episode focused on Steve Austin and the Attitude Era because it covers his days in WCW and ECW, skips over the Ringmaster days, mind you, because even WWE was like, yeah, that was pretty bad. We'd kind of like you to forget that. We'd kind of like you to forget that we took one of the best talkers in the business, one of the most captivating guys, and we just made him the Ringmaster who didn't talk. Like, Come on, really? The ringmaster, the guy at the circus who like bats away the lion or something. That guy, the guy trying really hard to not be food. Is that it? Are you trying to say like, oh, he's the master of the ring? Well, I hate to break to you, but King of the Ring is a thing. So whatever. It skips his ringmaster days up after his arrival, and it jumps straight to Austin 316 and him winning the world title alongside Mike Tyson. We see the full promo, not the full promo, but we see the backstory behind Austin 316. We have Austin explain like he got his mouth busted in during a match between him and Mark Merrill, and he had to go to the hospital to get it patched up. When he came back, he'd heard that Jake Roberts was doing this religious promo on him, and because at that time Jake Roberts had returned. He was a man who rediscovered faith, and he was a very faith based character. He was a face now. He was going to win King of the Ring as like a way to complete his redemption. That would be it. So that was the story, and that's why he was cutting these religious promos. And Austin flipped it around on him, and that's what led to 316 because it was an off the cuff promo that he won after winning King of the Ring talking about you can sit there and thump your Bible, but it didn't do you one bit of good, did it? It's like with that emphatic line that everybody remembers being, talk about your Psalms, talk about John 3:16. Austin 3:16 says, I just whooped your ass. And everybody loved that. I mean, everybody they took that and they took that and just ran with it. Like he said that line and people cheered. And, it ended it with, he could see at some point Vince McMahon was in the background just at commentary doing something, and he knew like, okay, I need to wrap this up. He's like, yeah, he's like, oh, I need to wrap this up really quick. So he ends with, and that's the bottom line because Stone Cold said so. Yeah, that was that. Oh, here it is. This is the whole thing before I go any further. He's like, first thing I want to be done is to get that piece of crap out of my ring. Don't just get him out of the ring, get him out of the WWF. Because I proved, son, without a shadow of a doubt, that you ain't got what it takes anymore. You sit there and you thump your Bible, you say your prayers, and it didn't get you anywhere. Talk about your Psalms, talk about John 3:16. Austin 3:16 says, I just whipped your ass. All he's got to do is go buy him a cheap bottle of Thunderbird and try to get some of that courage he had in his prime. As the King of the Ring, I'm serving notice to every one of the WWF superstars. I don't give a damn what they are. They're all on the list. That's Stone Cold's list, and I'm fixing to start running through all of them. As far as this championship match is concerned, son, I don't give a damn if it's David Boy Smith or Shawn Michaels. Steve Austin's time has come, and when I get the shot, you're looking at the next WWF champion, and that's the bottom line, because Stone Cold said so. That was it. That was that big quote. That's the moment that, hell, the next night would lead to dozens of signs, hundreds of Austin 316 signs everywhere, millions of 316 t-shirts sold after that, millions upon millions of dollars. Steve Austin's stock would rise higher than it had ever been, and it would catapult him all the way multiple times to the main event of WrestleMania. Yeah. Moving on from that, Vince was asked, are there any similarities between him and the Mr. McMahon character? And he says there's none. None whatsoever. Yet, Bruce Pritchard and Hulk Hogan say that, oh yeah, they're the same person. They're one and the same. Vince McMahon and Mr. McMahon are the same person. Like Bruce Pritchard saying, like, there would be times when Mr. McMahon would say something and Vince would be like, there's a difference between the characters. Because I would never say something like that. And like Bruce Pritchard was like, you did to me like a bunch of times. Because there's a bunch of things that Mr. McMahon would say to someone on TV that were the exact same thing as Vince McMahon would say to Bruce Pritchard backstage. Not backstage on camera, just backstage when they were working. Like Yeah, Bruce Pritchard and Hulk Hogan say Vince McMahon and Mr. McMahon are the same dude. But Shane McMahon says Mr. McMahon is an extension of Vince, an over exaggeration, if you will. It's just Vince taking his natural characteristics and traits and just dialing them all the way up. You know, if that first part was focused on Austin, then this second part was focusing on The Rock, because then it talks about his career all throughout, from Rocky Maivia to Nation Domination to his win at the Survivor Series against Mankind in a recreation of the Montreal Screwjob. So that was that Deadly Game tournament to crown the new champion, if I'm mistaken. So the doc shifting to who the Attitude Era was marketing itself to, and how it claimed that it didn't market towards kids, even though most of the audience was teenagers. A lot of how they presented women wouldn't fly nowadays because it was pretty exploitative. It was explicit in some ways. It was very sex centric, but it was in line with what was expected on TV at the time, since it was the 90s, and it paid to be edgy, it paid to push boundaries. People wanted to see what they could get away with and what they would allow on TV, and plus that's what audiences at the time were really leaning more toward than the straight-laced, clear-cut good guys and bad guys. Someone made the quote that in wrestling there's normally a good guy and a bad guy, but in the WWE in the 90s there was a bad guy and a worse guy. I'd have to say that was kind of it. That was a lot of things, especially with like the top guys. Like Steve Austin in any other era before the Attitude Era would be perceived as the heel. He was the bad guy. So, and he didn't really change anything about himself. He just changed who he went after. So, if you look at it that way, Steve Austin versus anybody is really just a case of bad guy versus worst guy. Anywho, Triple H made a great point when asked about the things that were done on TV by asking, who's worse, the ones who did it or the ones who enjoyed it? And that, pretty much bullet pointed the whole thing for me. It made a really good point on it all, because who's, it's like Sam Jackson once said in that movie Hitman's Bodyguard. He talked about how, who is more wicked, he who kills evil motherfuckers or he who protects evil motherfuckers? Question for a higher power, he thinks. I mean, not really. I mean, it's clear, obvious. It's the one who's protecting evil motherfuckers. Because what are you doing protecting evil motherfuckers? They're evil motherfuckers. Don't you know that? Hot damn. Anyway, things take a pretty dour note as it shifts focus to. It talks about the ads there and a lot of the highs, and then it shifts to a real low, a really bad low. Because now it's shifting focus to the Over the Edge pay per view. And yeah, that kind of I just got like a weird little twinge in my spine, because yeah, I know what that is. Fans have been fans of the WWE for a long time. If you've been watching WWE for many, many years, you know what Over the Edge, the pay-per-view is, especially during that time period in the Attitude Era. It's the pay-per-view in which Owen Hart died. That's what it was, and that's what they focus on. It shifts focus to Owen Hart. It leads to that, but for the time being, it talks about Owen Hart in the aftermath of the screw job, and how out of all the Hart family, he's the one who stayed when Brent left. I mean, Jim Neidhart stayed for a bit, and he was a part of DX for a little bit, but then Bret Hart talks about how there was like, at some point he thought maybe they had killed Owen to try and get back at him. And it's like, no, man, if anything, what they did to Jim Neidhart was to get back at Bret Hart, because that made no sense. You made him the dude who was beefing with Shawn Michaels and DX, as his brother-in-law end up siding with Shawn Michaels and DX, and then they beat the shit out of him, and then he's just gone. Like, what is that? What is that if not a giant fuck you to Bret Hart? Like, that just didn't make any sense to me. Like, what was that? Are you either going to use him or don't? No, this is some bullshit. But yeah, Owen Hart stayed longer than Jim Neidhart as the Blue Blazer. Because yes, there was that time when he was with the Nation, and he was like the Black Heart, but that ended pretty quickly. It was clearly a case of, we don't know what to do with you now, so we're just gonna make you the Blue Blazer, and you're gonna be this bumbling comedy character. And his entrance would go, he would descend from the ceiling, and he would stop just a little bit over the ring, and it'd be like, "Oh no, I'm stuck." Like he was supposed to come down in some dazzling entrance, but each thing was like, "Oh no, I'm stuck. Help me out of here!" And then he would disconnect the thing and he'd fall. Like he'd fall a safe distance and he would land right in the ring. Like, "Oh no, that wasn't supposed to happen." Like he would flop the entrance on purpose. That was the thing. But what ended up happening was, yes, he was descending from the ceiling, and when he was still about, I think, 20 feet in the air, and as he was being lowered down, the cable that was holding in place, it disconnected. It came apart, and he fell. Apparently, according to the referees, the referee that was there, the last thing he heard before Owen hit the ring was him yelling, "Watch out." And his wife was talking on the dark side of the ring. She was talking about how, like, even in his final moments, he was thinking about other people. He was trying to make sure that no one would get, like, the man below him wasn't going to get hurt. That says a lot about the kind of person that Owen Hart was. Like, even in that, what had to be seconds, like a few short seconds between him realizing he's falling and the fall, him trying to warn people on the ground, like, look out, so that he didn't land on them. It spoke to, like, how good of a guy he was. So yeah, the decision to continue the show after the fall, because this shows everything. Like, we don't see the fall, but we see, like, the paramedics come in. We see all the people in the ring, like, trying to clean the blood off. We see JR and Jerry Lawler trying to talk through this shit, trying to say, like, what folks, what you just witnessed wasn't a part of the show. That was a freak accident. Owen Hart has fallen. He's been rushed to hospital. We'll keep you informed if there's any updates. Apparently, there's this story that from of all people, from JR, where he says that while he was sitting there, he could hear Kevin Dunn, like when he asked what happened. He said that when Owen Hart had passed and Kevin Dunn found out, he told JR, like, Owen Hart passed away, and you're back in 3, 2. It's like, you can't just say some shit like that. And then that shows more than anything how cold and heartless, just inhuman fucking Kevin Dunn was. Because you can't be like, "Oh yeah, the man you just watched fall to his death has died." You just watched somebody fall to their death. By the way, you're back in 3, 2, 1. Oh, when I say you're back, you also have to tell everyone that he's passed away in 3, 2. Like, fuck that, man. What's wrong with you? Like, that's some inhumane thinking right there. Like, goddamn. Vince McMahon was ultimately the one who made the decision to continue the show, and that's fucked up. I believe that's fucked up. Like, he said because he continued the show because the live crowd didn't really see anything. It happened in the dark. I don't know, man. He said, I didn't get it. It's just like the thing, like, because the crowd watching at home didn't really see anything, they could continue with the show as if it didn't happen, except there's the big fucking blood stain that everyone has to step over on the way to get to the ring. Damn. It was wrong. Just the whole thing is just so fucking wrong what happened. It's just, I fully believe that show should have ended there. Forcing people to continue wrestling in the ring where they would someone fall to their death and there's still blood you can see in the corner that hasn't disappeared fully. It's physically a crime scene right now. Like, just, yeah, that shows you more than anything. Vince talks about how, like, if it had been him who'd fallen from that, like, he'd want the show to still continue. Like, man, fuck you. It wasn't you who fell. Damn. It was someone else, someone that everybody generally cared about and respected. And you're like, continue the show. Hey, the show goes on. Like, even if someone dies. Piece of shit. Fuck that guy, man. That was some bullshit tape, man. Fuck him. He's getting what he deserves anyway. Moving on to episode 5. Sorry if I sound weird. My throat's really bothersome. Episode 5, Family Business. This episode of the biopic starts talking about Vince and how all we know about his childhood is from what he's himself has told us, and how he's told about the abuse that he got from his stepfather, the incestuous happenings between him and his mother back in the day, like, and how he doesn't try to think about it that much. In his eyes, the fact that after all that happened to him, after he was abused, that he was still breathing, no matter how hard his father would hit him, the fact that he was still breathing at the end of it all, that he could still stand, meant that he won. And the fact that he's still here and his stepfather isn't, means that he won. At anything bad in his life, he got rid of. He just went, he was just of the opinion of out with it all. It's in the past, move on. That's how he views the bad events in his life. When most people, I'd say most people don't think that way. I don't think that way. Granted, it is a good idea to put horrid things that happened to you in the past, as you've gone through the needed therapy and learned to move on with your life and are in a better place than you were then you can put it in the past. But the idea of just approaching it with, it happened, I'm still here, move on, it's a very callous way to live and see things. But yeah, given the title of this episode and the focal point of this episode being Vince's children, they are Vince's children, Vince's children, Shane and Stephanie McMahon, since it's called Family Business. Stephanie wasn't allowed to date the talent. Stephanie wasn't allowed to date talent, but it was actually Vince's idea to pair her with Triple H in a storyline together. The McMahon Helmsley era, that's it. And that's what led to them getting together IRL. Funny enough, there's a story of how Stephanie was apparently Vince wanted Stephanie to date a guy that that was like Triple H, and he would always use Triple H as the example. He was like, be with a guy who's a lot like Triple H, and Shane would always butt in, but not Triple H. It was like, oh yeah, not Triple H, a guy like him, but not him. Okay, heavy wink on that one. It was kind of like how Chris met Nancy Benoit in WCW, because at the time Nancy Benoit was with Kevin Sullivan, and this would earned him the moniker in the IWC's eyes as the man who booked his own divorce, because as part of the storyline, she would leave him and she would be more attracted to Chris Benoit. And, he had them maintain kayfabe. He had them travel together, live in hotels together on TV. They had to pretend to be lovey-dovey with each other. And this led to them developing feelings for each other, because same thing happened here with Stephanie and Triple H, because they had to be in a relationship together. They had to pretend to be with each other on on screen. And, eventually all that stuff they were filming, the sparks started to fly and they actually started developing feelings for one another. Moving on from that, Vince McMahon promised Linda something when they got married. Two things. He promised her that he would always love her and there would never be a dull moment. I can say, given all that we know now, that he only lived up to that second part. Given what we know now, he only lived up to that second part. Linda McMahon herself never liked being on TV. She didn't see herself as an actress. It just wasn't, she didn't want to be on TV. And she said, she's not an actress. And if you've seen the way she performs when she was on there, whenever she'd have to cut a promo, whenever she had to appear on TV, it's like, yeah, we can see that, lady. You're the worst of the McMahons in terms of your ability to entertain. And the best performance we got out of Linda was the build to WrestleMania X7, where she just had to sit there comatose in a wheelchair. But yeah, she also took the worst stunner out of anybody, until Vince anyway. And Vince McMahon took what might just be the last stunner ever done at a WrestleMania, and it is also the worst stunner ever done at WrestleMania. But yeah, for the longest time in all of WWE history, Linda McMahon took the worst stunner out of anybody. And I'd rank it like this: first is Shane, second is Stephanie, third was Vince, and the fourth is Linda. Because when she got stunned on the few rare occasions she did, she took it worse than anybody. She didn't know how to sell. And Vince McMahon took, I would say, the most stunners out of anybody, and they looked bad each time. There were varying degrees of bad, but they felt good because, yes, Steve Austin got to stun McMahon. It's so awesome. You ignored how bad the stunner actually was. And the way it played out, like on Austin's podcast, McMahon himself was like, "You like I took the worst stunner out of anybody, and I never took it the same way twice. Like you kicked me in the shins sometimes, you kicked me in the stomach, you kicked me right in the groin, and it was like." And Steve was trying to explain like it was because I was wearing those like short jeans. I don't have much movement in those, but like I get that, but like, okay, so the kick didn't land. What's your excuse for the rest of the stunner, man? What's your excuse for your head totally leaving his fucking arms, or worse, you just like falling forward, T over kettle, instead of going backwards like everyone else, or flop, or you just flop like a fish, like whatever, man. It was terrible, but yeah. Shane Man took the best down out of anybody because he put theatrics into it. He would like bounce back, or he would like just drink something and he would like spew water, and it was awesome. But I think one of the best stunners ever was by Razor Ramon, Scott Hall, WrestleMania 18, WrestleMania X8. When he took that stunner, like boom, he sort of stood there for a sec, like he was gonna tip over. Then Austin got him again, boom, and he like sprang up. You know, he was like his feet was spring loaded, man. He took the best stunner. It wasn't the best match. Honestly, at that WrestleMania, it should have been Hogan versus Austin. But yeah, the match they had him in instead, well, itself wasn't, you know, um, it wasn't the best match they could have had. It was a good match, and it had a fantastic ending with that stunner. I'll give it that much, you know. But yeah, moving away from that, there's this quote from Dave Meltzer. He talks about how guys who fantasized over hot women but hated them because they could never get them and enjoyed seeing them get dehumanized. That's Dave Meltzer basically talking about. He's talking about the fans who enjoyed the trishstratus bark like a dog segment. He's essentially calling them incels, and I don't think he's wrong for that, because as bad as this segment was, and as bad as we look at it now, the fans in the attendance were loving it. Because yes, we're witnessing a human being be degraded and made, made to feel terrible and treated like they're not human. That's terrible. But the fans in the audience were like, yeah, but we're getting to see her stripped down to nothing but her panties, man. Like, god damn, it's exactly, he's basically, they're insults, essentially. It's like, the guys who fantasize about hot women but hate them because these women wouldn't give them the time of day. Like, and now you're seeing one of these gorgeous women be treated like shit, and deep down inside, you're enjoying this shit. On the outside, you're enjoying this shit because deep down, you wish you were in that moment. You wish you were Vince. You wish you would tell a woman to get down on her knees and bark like a dog and had that kind of control over her. It's a fucked up thing. It was fucked up then, it's fucked up now. There was no point to this other than, to really show that, hey, Vince McMahon is a scumbag. Like, that's all it is. It was to show that, hey, Vince McMahon is a scumbag, which we already knew, considering the fact this was in the lead up to, like, that WrestleMania X7. It was already established, hey, Vince McMahon is a cheating, lying, manipulative scumbag. So this wasn't necessary. This was just him being a dick just to be a dick. But yeah. It shifts then to talking about, because this was around about the same time, talks about the purchase of WCW, how Vince, after the purchase, was business as usual, even though the night before, according to Brian Gewirtz, there was this crazy celebration on their private jet as the purchase was happening. And we shift now from a huge success to a huge failure, as the documentary talks about. It goes from Vince purchasing WCW to Vince starting the XFL, the Extreme Football League. We talk about how the XFL lost its ratings, how football pundits and football fans didn't really like the whole WWE vibe of it all. And it all culminated in this interview with, I think, Bob Costas. And Vince just you could see, like, dude seething throughout this. I think it was Bob Costas on the record, yeah. The failure of the XFL around this time was compounded by World Wildlife Fund suing the WWE, which was then called the WWF, and forcing the name change after they won the lawsuit, because they had the initials WWF way before World Wrestling Federation ever did. And that's what led to the, get the F out ad campaign, where they went from WWF to the now WWE. It talks of all the people who've sued Vince McMahon and eventually came back You know, uh, after even those who tried to run him out of business. We see Hulk Hogan, we see Eric Bischoff, Ultimate Warrior, all those people who at one point tried to sue McMahon ended up coming back into the fold. It then moves to chronicle the ruthless aggression and the rise of John Cena from his debut against Kurt Angle to becoming the Doctor of Thugonomics. A funny blooper here is that when they talk about Cena winning his first world title at WrestleMania, the footage because it's shot from behind, you see Cena raising the belt, but in the corner of the screen you can see the Big Show, and it's clear like, wait, this isn't footage from WrestleMania 21. This is footage from WrestleMania 20. This is footage of his U.S. title win. Like, man, moving back downwards on the pendulum, we get Trishstratus talking about how if certain wrestlers didn't do what Vince asked them to do, because like it's too ridiculous, or like my character wouldn't really do that, which is something apparently Trish Stratus did once. She got like a script from Vince McMahon, and she was like, "I don't think I would say this. Like me in character, I wouldn't say this or I wouldn't do this." Yeah, that she ended up being punished. Keep in mind, the first time she turned down one of Vince's ideas was in the lead up to WrestleMania X7, and she says after that, after she turned the idea down, that's when that infamous bark like a dog segment came. It's like, yeah, she, yeah, they'd get punished. She talked about how they get punished, and at one point, she was supposed to make out with another female wrestler who was alluded to be Ashley Massaro, and Trish said no to this, and she coincidentally lost her title the very next week to Mickie James at WrestleMania 22. Mickie James, a woman who in that time period, given her style of character, had no problem kissing other women. Just watched the build up to WrestleMania 22 to see that. And, I think given all the illusions here and the footage that they used, they were alluding that there was supposed to, maybe, just maybe, Trish Stratus was supposed to win that match at WrestleMania. Not only that, but at some point, maybe, given that first illusion of, oh yeah, I was supposed to. Okay, yeah, I initially thought that maybe instead of Mickie versus Trish Stratus at WrestleMania 22, it was going to be Ashley versus Trish Stratus. But then I recalled she said she lost the title a week later at WrestleMania. Then I'm like, oh, wait, that doesn't make sense because, yeah, that build up for that match had been happening for months. So, yeah, but it would have been a weird theory, just in my opinion. That would have been a strange theory. But it circles back to being about the relationship between Vince and his children and how he was hard on them. He didn't treat them any different just because they were his kids. He wanted them to live up to the McMahon family name. In fact, he would treat them harsher than most people because they had his name, because he wanted them to prove themselves worthy of carrying his last name. Shane McMahon pops up in this point and he talks about how at the time he wanted to buy the UFC, when it was going through some financial troubles, he pitched the idea to Vince McMahon, but Vince didn't like it. So that was the end of that. And it shows the two different thinking styles of these two men. Paul Heyman tells a story of a time that Shane and Vince were having a disagreement on something. I think it might have been the UFC thing, might have been something else. I don't know. But they were having a disagreement to the point that Vince just turned and told Shane McMahon to drive a knife into his heart to prove how much he wanted this idea to happen. If he really wanted Vince's company, he really wanted this to work, he had to take this knife and stick it right into his heart to take him out of the equation. And he told him that if he didn't, then it showed that he must not wanted it that bad, and he needed to take that into consideration as well. And ultimately, that was one of the things that would lead to Shane McMahon departing the WWE, with Shane, saying in the interview that he didn't want the professional relationship that they were having as, in the WWE working there to negatively impact their personal relationship. And for the time being, in that period of time, the way the character was portrayed on TV, it seemed like Shane McMahon was the heir apparent to the WWE, but really behind the scenes, it always leaned more to Stephanie. Because I think at one point he might have been, had he stayed and they'd found a way to work it out and he continued to be in WWE all these years, he might have had a stronger foothold in the company than he does now. Because, Stephanie stayed throughout everything that happened. She stayed and she was up to do just about anything. So I think the fact that she stayed and he didn't is what ingratiated her more in Vince McMahon's eyes than Shane McMahon. And it's what led to her being, you know, more closer to heir apparent than Vince McMahon, than Shane, because she was always there. She never went anywhere. So, yeah, that's just what I opinion on it. And that is my thoughts on episode 5 of the Mr. McMahon docuseries. Episode 6. The big finish, man. Final episode. The finish. This episode opens with Vince McMahon talking about how his brain is different than most. Yeah, no shit, man. The last 20 years have proven that. His brain is different than most. It's like he has two computers in his mind that he listens, one says one thing, another says the other. But there's a third in there that he can listen, that doesn't really speak, but he can tap into if he wanted to. Goes into the episode then shifts into the Trump versus McMahon battle of the billionaires and how Donald Trump was seemingly more fit for the world of professional wrestling and WWE than he was for the realm of politics. And in fact, there's a lot of Donald Trump, what he was like on Monday Night Raw, in what he is now on TV. It then shifts to the death of Mr. McMahon angle and how it was upended by a very real death of one Chris Benoit. The death of Mr. McMahon was believable to such an extent that apparently even Donald Trump called the WWE to make sure Vince was okay. The editing on that explosion was just so good. But yeah, honestly, I'm surprised they covered the death of Chris Benoit in here. Given everything that WWE had done to try and erase him from WWE history, it was definitely surprising how much they tried to, how much they covered. Not just Benoit, but like all the stuff about concussions and whatnot. It even shows highlights of his career, a bit of the Raw tribute show, and the murder suicide chaos that followed it. Vince McMahon puts it down to they asked him about the potential correlation between Benoit killing his family between Benoit killing his family and steroids. Maybe it was roid rage. Maybe that's what he did. What led to him doing what he did. Maybe taking steroids to get in shape to do wrestling is what led to him flatlining his family. That's what the correlation was, and that's what they asked him about. And his response was, "Human beings are flawed. Chris went nuts. It happens." Former WWE superstar Chris Nowitzki comes on here and he talks about CTE. He talks about the impact a concussion can have on a person and how that may have played a part in all this. Because one concussion is pretty bad, but having concussions over the course of several years can cause like lasting damage. And like Vince McMahon views this as, and I quote, a ridiculous statement. So he says how it looks like there's damage, but really there isn't. And this is undercut. His statements, a bunch of his statements have been undercut by the editing on this docuseries because he says that it looks like there's damage, but there's not. And then Netflix just shows a bunch of footage of Chris Benoit getting dumped on his head from botched moves. You see, Vince was speaking as like, well, Benoit's finish was a diving headbutt. And on that, he would land right on his head. And that's what caused it all. And he was like, no, with that move, it looks like there's damage, but really there isn't. The opponent isn't landing right on the head. They're like landing on their hands and like keeping their head protected. But that's not what the documentary was getting at. Documentary was getting at all the times Chris Benoit was legit dumped right on his head from botched maneuvers, and when he would take chair shots right to the skull. Stuff like that was what caused concussions, not that diving headbutt. In the aftermath of scanning Benoit's brain, the findings of Nowitzki, along with the info they got cooperating with the WWE, would lead to WWE changing a lot of their thoughts and practices on what is appropriate and making the business a lot more safe. For starters, certain moves were banned, and like the chair shot to the head was banned. you had to get your hand up and like properly cushion yourself. You couldn't just take a chair shot directly to the head anymore like they did in the past. They then show a slew of wrestlers who passed in their 30s, such as British Bulldog, Eddie Guerrero, Mr. Perfect, and Mr. Man saying in an interview on the subject that he would accept no responsibility for these people's deaths, whereas he puts the blame on the wrestlers abusing prescription drugs. That's his explanation for why. Oh, Vince in the present day puts the explanation of why these wrestlers died young on their abusing of prescription drugs. But circling back to the topic of concussions, we see Undertaker getting concussed at WrestleMania 30. And yeah, it's one of the most famous cases of a concussion in the WWE because at WrestleMania 30, when he was wrestling Brock, he got concussed early on in the match. And he just in a daze continued to wrestle the match. And it wasn't the kind of match that he wanted. So after that, after he got backstage, he collapsed and they had to rush him to the hospital. And when he came to, he stated that he couldn't remember his own name. Like, yeah, concussions are serious business, folks. Like, in the past, a wrestler would get a concussion and they would be back to work in a couple days. Like, if you got a concussion on pay-per-view, you're back on Raw the very next night or something like that. But, like, looking at it now, and you see when you hear the story about how the Undertaker got a concussion that was so bad, he straight up forgot who he was. And, like, you realize that would never fly today. That whole thing of you got a concussion, oh, just sleep it off. You come back tomorrow and you'll be okay. Like, nah, concussions are taken way more seriously now. There's protocols in place. The wellness policy has changed. It's all, drastically different because of all that's happened with, Chris Benoit and the findings that were discovered on his brain and all the damage CT can do. And what we now know with CT, with all the stuff we know now, yeah. Going back to WrestleMania 30, Vince says watching the match that he couldn't see the spot where Undertaker got concussed and that it was likely due to the shock of losing at Mania. That's why Undertaker couldn't remember it all. Sure, because it's not like there was a point where he got dumped on his fucking head and it did damage and that's what essentially erased all his memory. Surely the shock of losing is what made him forget the whole matchup. That's what did it, right? Because that's how fucking brain works. That's how shock works, right, Vince? Brian Gewirtz calls WWE in the PG era the Muppet Show. And damn it, if that wasn't the most accurate description of it all, because there was this one episode of WWE where there was guest hosted by the Muppets. It doesn't get more Muppet Show than that, okay? WWE went from Ruthless Aggression to a fucking kids' TV show. It was PG-10, I remember correctly. I saw a rating on TV once, and straight up it said PG-10. That's when it was bad. That's when I knew, like, holy shit, this is a children's show. I stopped watching as the Ruthless Aggression was coming to an end, like for me. And, when I started watching up again, that's when I noticed, like, the PG-10. And I'm like, shit, man. So, yeah. They were trying to spin the shift to the PG era as the time period where the women's division really started to take shape. That's bullshit. That is total bullshit. The fucking beginning of the PG era didn't also mark the beginning of the Divas Revolution and women being taken more seriously. Quite the opposite, in fact. The end of Ruthless Aggression led to the creation of the Divas division, the deactivation of the women's title. They weren't called women anymore. They were called Divas, and they were taken way less seriously. Granted, before they were sexualized and they were used for their bodies and their looks, but now it was just like, oh, it was bullshit. Now the wrestling, see, as sexist as Ruthless Aggression era was, at least there were good matches. At least there were women on the roster who were given storylines and time to shine. As bad as those could be, and as hard to watch as those could be, they were at least treated way more seriously than they were during the Divas era. So the PG era being the phase where the women's division really started to take shape, that idea is total bullshit. Fuck that idea. That's not what it really happened. The real Divas Revolution didn't kick into gear until freaking 2014, and WWE went full PG in 2010. So fuck that. Don't try to pretend like you started taking your women's division right and like you're trying to rewrite history here. That's not what happened. You didn't want to take the women seriously or give them any more time until the fans of your TV show started saying, hey, hashtag give divas a chance. Treat the women seriously. They're having really good matches, but their matches are only 5 minutes long. We'd like you to give them more time, please. You have a good roster here. Use them. But yeah, moving away from that. I remember watching the Shane McMahon return on Monday Night Raw, because there was this thing of like Vince McMahon was giving some award, some prestigious award to Stephanie, and it was just talking about like McMahon family excellence and whatever, and legacy and all that. Watching this and thinking, while she was being given this award, I was thinking to myself, it would be so sweet if Shane McMahon came back right now, but that's likely not going to happen. I mean, that ain't going to happen. He ain't been back in years. Why would he come back now? Then, as I was saying that, I don't know where you get that. Here comes the money. Here we go. Money talks. I'm like, oh shit, this is dope. This is awesome. Like, I was so happy to see him. I was so glad because I was a fan of the crazy shit that Shane would do in his matches and the kind of matches that he would have with guys like Kurt Angle or Steve Blackman or, I didn't see the match. I saw that spot where he falls off the stage or like Randy Orton and shit. I love that. Oh, and also he was coming in and pitching himself as this alternative to what Stephanie and Vince had been doing and this figure of change. And that's exactly what I wanted to see at that point. I wanted to change in WWE because WWE was pretty goddamn shit around this period, man. In the lead up to WrestleMania 32. Vince McMahon says he's always been proud of what Shane has done. And he knows that a lot of what his son does, even the risky stuff, is his attempt to try and get his dad's respect, and claims that, there's a part of him that's like he wishes he'd given a few more pats on the back. And it even shows the footage of Vince giving Shane a hug in the aftermath of his match at Undertaker. And though he gives him a pat on the back, he tells him how proud he is. And it's like, that made Shane feel better, like it was, in his eyes, the way I see it, a vindication of sorts. Like, it's okay. It's like, it's okay. I can stop this now. He wouldn't. I mean, he'd still do, the Shane O'Mac shit, but it would be to a lower frequency than it did before. And it was like, finally, I got what I wanted. Now I'm not, whatever comes next, I'm not doing this for my dad or his adulation. Now I'm going to do this for me. That's just what it looked like in my view. But yeah. It shows footage of Vince giving Shane a hug after his match against Taker. And we get a few talking heads like Trishstratus, John Cena, and The Undertaker talking about how Vince McMahon was kind of like a father figure to all of them. But in The Undertaker's case, it was more like a brother because given their ages, I mean, dude, that relationship is bizarre. You as old as you are, Taker, you're saying that Vince was like a father to you? I mean, come on, dude, really? Y'all are like brothers. Don't get it twisted, okay? Y'all like brothers. Don't be saying like, yeah, he's like a father to me. Like, come on, man. He ain't that fucking old. And you're not that fucking young, man. Come on. Anywho, Stephanie is a lot more like Vince than Shane is. And Tony Atlas speaks of how Shane is a nice guy. But a nice guy can't be a boss because people will take advantage of that niceness. And there's no taking advantage of Stephanie. She is her father's daughter. She was the clear heir apparent over Shane because she is just like Vince. Vince McMahon would 100% want someone just like him running his company if he couldn't do it himself. And the best way to ensure that would be to put Stephanie into the picture as opposed to Shane. Anywho, when asked if he ever saw himself retiring, Vince said, I never understood why people stop growing. When you stop growing, you die. I have no sympathy for people like that. So go die. We then see the last time Vince was at WrestleMania, which showed a recap of the worst stunner in the history of WWE, and showing that even at that event, it showed that even at that advanced age, he was still willing to go out there and work the crowd and be Mr. McMahon. Even though he hadn't been evil Mr. McMahon in years, he was still willing to go out there and put on a show for the audience. We, get asked this question of Booker T saying, what would it take for Vince McMahon to retire? Booker T responds, a nuclear bomb exploding. Well, a bomb did go off, Mr. T. A bomb by the name of Janelle Grant. Now, after the allegations by Miss Grant became public, Vince declined the final interviews that was supposed to be scheduled for this docuseries. And knowing what we know now of the documentary, we see a lot of what Vince McMahon did on TV. With a lot of the female wrestlers, wasn't him playing the character, but him doing what he does backstage on camera as his attempts to blur the lines. Like now that all this stuff has come out, a lot of what he did on TV, he can just say, oh, no. That was just, that's not really me. That's just me being the character. That's me playing it up for the audience. It's basically, it was earlier in the Dark Series, it was said that Mr. McMahon is an extension of Vince McMahon. And a lot of the shit he cuts onto the promos he would cut on TV, or the way he would act backstage too, when he was talking to talent, when he was talking to his employees. So yeah, it's an extension or an exaggeration of Vince McMahon. Yes, there is a lot of Mr. McMahon within Vince McMahon, and when he's on TV, that's when he gets to let it out. But when he was with Janelle Grant and the shit that happened behind the scenes, that was him at his worst, I would say. He was trying to, by putting that version of himself out on TV, he was trying to blur the lines between reality and storyline. Like how there was a time when he was accused of groping a woman at a tanning salon. And shortly afterwards, there was a story where Mickie James frames a dude for doing something he didn't do and alleging that this dude grabbed her inappropriately in the storyline. So it's like, okay. Now you're just rubbing it in our fucking faces, man. Like, what the hell? There's a quote from this writer, I think, like some kind of wrestling historian. She says, "No one does evil like Vince McMahon." Paul Heyman has a quote says, "We live by the law of the jungle. The lion who still rules his kingdom wouldn't have it any other way." This is Paul Heyman talking about Vince coming back after all this stuff. After first stepping down, he came back and took back his old job and decided to sell WWE instead of giving it to Shane or Stephanie and keeping it as a family business. See, Meltzer says, people will support a product and not care about the moral fiber of the guy running the product. Dave Meltzer was speaking on the continued success of WWE despite all the stuff with Mr. McMahon and the aftermath of the sale. And he's right. WWE has been more successful in these last few years than they've ever been. They've made more money this past year, had more successes with WrestleMania, Backlash, SummerSlam, all this. They've gone from strength to strength since this has happened. So yeah, people will continue to watch WWE. They will continue to support the product, even though the man largely responsible for this product, Vince McMahon, the guy who created it all, is a scumbag. Like they don't care. He's not got his grubby hands on anything anymore. He's not running the show anymore. He's not involved in creative. They can enjoy their content. And I kind of feel the same way. Like I can watch WWE and not feel guilty anymore because I know he's not, a part of this anymore. My watching isn't supporting him in any way, shape, or form. I actively condemn him and all he does. And then right now he has nothing to do with the WWE. So yeah, it explains how people can watch on guilt-free with this. Bruce Pritchard sees the docuseries as a hit piece on Vince McMahon, as opposed to what it initially thought it would be, which be a biopic chronicling the life and times of Vince McMahon. And you kind of understand why he says this, because, it really changed once all these accusations got out. Now we really get into the dark and disturbing stuff here. We get these text messages. We see bits and pieces of these text messages that Vince McMahon was sending to Janelle Grant, and everything he did to her and how he would use her, and how he would use sex toys and sex toys that were named after WWE superstars on her, and he would send explicit photos of her to he would have her sleep with other men, and he sent explicit photos of her to Brock Lesnar, promising her to him if he re-signed with the WWE. So yeah, Once those accusations began, he was completely gone from power. He was removed from the board. He had sold off a lot of his shares, so he didn't have the same power he did before, and he could very easily be removed by TKO and the other board members. And then accusations, once those Janelle Grant accusations became public knowledge, and he was stripped of the power he once had, the accusations made by Ashley Massaro resurfaced, and this included an unreleased statement from Mazzaro on how Vince McMahon had made sexual advances towards her, and once she rebuked him, he wrote stories for her solely to humiliate her. And given what we know now, it's like that's way easier to believe now than it was way back then. The talking heads were asked what Vince's legacy will be, and many couldn't answer that, but Tony Atlas did and said his legacy would be that he's the greatest performer from all time. But another talking head said that anything good that Vince McMahon did is now totally inextricable from all the bad that he did. When Vince McMahon was asked to describe who Vince McMahon is, one of the phrases he used was sort of a paradox of paradoxes. He's saying, which is the character and which is me? One is exaggerated, but I'm not sure which one. That was Vince McMahon talking on the Mr. McMahon character versus Vince McMahon, the man behind the character. And that's quite a way to sum it all up. I mean, looking back, those are my takes on episode 6, the end of the Mr. McMahon documentary. Watching this whole thing back, knowing what I know now, watching this whole thing back and seeing everything from those early days and Vince's relationship with his dad and his relationship with his family, his children, how other superstars in WWE viewed him, how wrestling historians view him, how, people in other fields like sports viewed him, and hearing all these people's thoughts on McMahon, on the things he did, on the things WWE did under his, reign, seeing all this come to fruition, and then seeing all this as it is, you hear all these allegations, all these accusations, and you see all the heinous shit his character did on TV, and you're like, what kind of person could drum up this kind of an idea and willingly put themselves in that scenario? And it comes clear, like, yes, someone who does this behind the scenes, because I think it got to a point where he viewed himself as so unstoppable that he could, kind of admit, indirectly admit that, yeah, he is a terrible person behind the scenes, and he gets to flex that right in front of people's noses, and they can't do a thing about it because he can just claim like, oh, no, I was just playing a character. That's not who I am. And, when the camera's now rolling, that's not who I am when people's alone. I'm not an evil, vindictive boss who will use his power and standing within the company to manipulate you and force you to do sexual favors for me and do all that. Nah, I'm not that guy. That's just a character. Well, now we know that that character, more than anything, is just the dude being his real self. And the version of himself that he tries to portray when the cameras aren't rolling, yeah. The version he wants you to see is not who he really is. At the beginning, he says he doesn't want people to really know him, to know the real Vince McMahon. And unfortunately for him, we do. Granted, we don't know everything. All that we know about Vince McMahon as a person, from in terms of his past, in terms of his early life, we only know from the stuff that he's told. And, we won't be able to get any further information on that because his father's passed away, his mother's passed away. Nobody really knew him from back then except Linda. And, it doesn't benefit her in any way to speak out on him. You can tell, given where she is now in the political sphere, that she wants nothing to do with him. They've been separated for years. They asked her what was going on when these allegations started going on. She admits that, yeah, her and Vince have been separated for a long time. It's basically saying like, hey, I haven't fucked with him in a while. In a long time. I haven't fucked with him in a long time. I know nothing about what's going on. I have nothing to do with any of this. Leave me out of it. I got my own shit. It is what it is. He will face justice. He'll hopefully, all these accusations are going to stick. and he'll actually get punished for what he does. But in the world we live in, if you have enough money, I mean, he's not going to jail. From what I know, like, you know, what I know at this point, he's not going to jail or anything, but still be some way like justice will be done. Unfortunately, we live in a society where if you're rich enough, you can essentially just buy your way out of this sort of problem. Like if somebody sues you for a certain amount of money, you could just pay the money and go away, no harm, no foul. But there is some form of justice in that his image is now forever tarnished by the things he did in towards the end of his career in WWE, and they have totally outshined and dwarfed all the seeming good that he was able to accomplish. So, yeah, as much as people want to sit and look back fondly on the good times of the Mr. McMahon character, those times, those moments, those matches, all of that are now forever and eternally tainted by all the horrendous things that Vince McMahon was doing behind the scenes off camera. We're never going to be able to see him around a female talent on an episode of Raw that we look back on or a pay-per-view and not think like, oh, yeah, we know why he wrote this here, or we know if he's doing this on camera, what the hell was he doing behind the scenes when nobody was around? That's definitely gonna, change things from now on. And WWE has done all it can to distance itself from Vince McMahon. Like they've just pretended he doesn't exist. Already in WWE, even before all this, there was a thing of like, don't mention Vince McMahon, like when you give your Hall of Fame speech. And, outside of just that, they weren't mentioning Vince McMahon anyway. It wasn't like they would go out of the way whenever there was like a big show. Okay, whenever there was like a major show like Raw 25 or Raw 1000 or SmackDown 1000, yeah, then they would mention Vince McMahon. Then they would show the highlights of the times he was on that show. Then they would big up everyone involved because that was before all this happened. And if something like this happens now, if there's some major anniversary for a Raw or SmackDown or a pay-per-view or anything major WWE has to do, they will strongly, strongly try to avoid mentioning Vince McMahon in any way, shape, or form because it does them no good. And the fact that they were able to just oust him from his position of power like that, it shows like he's not as powerful as he once was. He doesn't have the same sway that he did once. Like it is no longer his company. It is a new era in WWE because for the first time since its inception as the WWE, it is a time period where Vince McMahon isn't running the show. Vince McMahon is not on the show. Vince McMahon isn't influencing the show in any way, shape, or form. And the WWE superstars and sports entertainment in general is better off for it. I can say that much. Anyway, folks, those are my thoughts on the Mr. McMahon Netflix documentary series. I have been your host, the man on the moon, here on Moonlight Kingdom Reviews. This has been just quite a mammoth episode of Moonlight Kingdom Reviews, and I just want to say I enjoyed covering this. I hope to do more in the future. Got plenty more coming your way. So, Moonlight citizens, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. All them nice things. I've been the man on the moon here on Moonlight Kingdom, and I'm out.